Prince Zaroth stood at the center of the grand meeting hall, his sharp eyes scanning the room full of diplomats and ambassadors from across the galaxy.
Ow.
The air was thick with tension, the silence a clear sign that the discussions of the day had reached an important turning point. Zaroth was known throughout the galaxy as a powerful leader, the ruler of a vast and ancient empire. His pride was legendary, and he expected all who entered his domain to acknowledge his superiority. But then, the human captain walked into the room, his presence immediately different from the others. Captain Jackson Clark wasn't the tallest, or the most intimidating of men, but there was something in the way he held himself that commanded attention. He didn't bow before Zaroth or anyone else in the room. Instead, Jackson walked straight to the front, his gaze locked with Zaroth's, a quiet confidence in his eyes. Zaroth frowned. He didn't like this human. Humans were small, weak creatures when compared to his people, but they were ambitious. That in itself was dangerous. At the summit, humans had been nothing but trouble, but Zaroth had hoped this meeting would be different. Yet here Jackson was, standing as if he were an equal to the alien royalty present. The room fell into a hushed silence as Zaroth rose from his throne-like chair. He was taller than Jackson, his sharp features and glowing purple skin making him appear even more imposing. Captain Clark Zaroth said, his voice smooth but filled with hidden disdain. "I trust you understand the importance of this summit. Perhaps you should reconsider your ... attitude." Jackson didn't flinch. "I understand the importance, Your Highness," he replied calmly. His voice was steady, but there was a coldness to it that Zaroth didn't expect. "And I have no interest in bowing to anyone." The words hit like a slap to Zaroth's pride. A cold rage simmered beneath his skin, but he kept his composure. Not in front of human insult him, not in front of all these dignitaries. Had to put Jackson in his place. But the human wasn't giving him any reason to react the way Zaroth wanted. "You misunderstand," Captain Zaroth said slowly, his eyes narrowing. "This is not a matter of bowing, this is about respect, something your kind seems to be lacking." The prince's words were calculated, designed to provoke. He wanted to break Jackson's confidence, to show everyone in the room that humans were beneath the might of his empire. The room waited in expectation for Jackson to respond. Jackson didn't speak immediately. Instead, he simply turned his back on Zaroth and began to walk towards the exit. The silence in the room deepened, confusion and shock sweeping over the faces of the diplomats. Zaroth blinked in surprise. What was this? How dared the human turn his back on him? The most powerful being in the room? Was this a new tactic? Was Jackson trying to assert dominance by walking away? The prince's anger flared. His fist clenched at his side, and his voice boomed, echoing in the hall. "You dare turn your back on me, human?" Zaroth's voice filled the room, causing everyone to jump. "I will not tolerate this disrespect." But Jackson didn't stop. He kept walking, his steps steady, as though Zaroth's outburst hadn't even reached him. The captain's back remained turned to the prince, his posture straight and unwavering. The room fell into complete silence. Every eye was now on Zaroth, who stood frozen for a moment, staring at Jackson's retreating form. He had never been treated like this before, not by anyone. Not by any ruler, diplomat, or warrior. Captain Clark Zaroth called out again, his voice now shaking with fury. "You will regret this." But Jackson didn't turn back. He reached the door and stepped out without a word. The room was still, the tension thick. The prince's anger boiled over, but he said nothing more. He stood there, his mind racing, trying to process what had just happened. It wasn't just that Jackson had walked away, it was that he had done so in silence. There had been no argument, no shouting, no defense of his actions. He had simply turned and left, as if Zaroth's words meant nothing, as if the prince himself meant nothing. The other ambassadors and dignitaries stood in shocked silence, unsure of what to say or do. No one had ever dared act in such a way before, and it was clear that they were all waiting for Zaroth to react. But the prince didn't respond. His mind was too consumed with the unexpected defeat. 23 years had passed since that humiliating moment, but Prince Zaroth could still feel the sting of it in his bones. He had tried to push it from his mind, to forget the human who had walked away from him in silence. But the memory lingered, like an open wound that refused to heal. As the years passed, Zarath's empire grew stronger. His forces expanded, his power solidified, and his pride was untouchable. He ruled over countless worlds, and his word was law. But no matter how high he climbed, there was always that one moment, that one memory of the human who had made him feel weak. Now everything had changed. The human race, once considered insignificant, had grown. Their technology had advanced in ways that no one had expected. Human colonies were no longer scattered and weak, but organized and powerful. Their fleets, once small and ill-equipped, were now among the most advanced in the galaxy. It was during a high-profile summit where leaders from across the galaxy gathered to discuss matters of peace and trade that Zarath received the news. A human delegation, led by none other than Captain Jackson Clark, had arrived and was seeking an audience with the royal family. Zarath's first reaction was disbelief. Why would Jackson Clark, of all people, come here now? After all these years, why return? The prince's pride flared. Was this a challenge? Was this some sort of trap? Your Highness, one of Zarath's advisors, a sharp-eyed alien named Tlan, spoke cautiously. The humans have come with a proposition. They seek an alliance, not a confrontation. Zarath's lips tightened into a thin line. He wasn't interested in alliances. He had no need for them. His empire was strong, and he didn't need the assistance of anyone, least of all humans. Yet there was something about this moment that made him uneasy. The silence of that day, the way Jackson had walked away from him without a word, echoed in Zarath's mind as though the past had come to claim him. "Tell them, I will see them," Zarath said, his voice cold and commanding. His pride would not allow him to show weakness. He would not let Jackson Clark think that he was afraid. The royal court prepared for the meeting. The grand hall was filled with alien dignitaries, each of them watching with interest. They knew the history between Zarath and the human leader, but they had never witnessed the tension that simmered between them. The room buzzed with anticipation as Jackson and his delegation were led into the hall. When the human captain entered, Zarath immediately noticed the change. Jackson Clark was no longer the young, unsure man who had walked out of the summit years ago. He had grown, both in stature and presence. His eyes, though calm, now carried the weight of years of experience. His uniform was sleek, marking the rise of the human fleets. Jackson didn't bow. He didn't make any show of submission. He walked into the room with the same quiet confidence that had left Zarath fuming all those years ago. The prince's pride burned, but he kept his composure. He would not let this human show him up again. Captain Clark. Zarath greeted him, his voice smooth but laced with thinly veiled disdain. "It has been a long time." Jackson met his gaze without hesitation. There was no fear, no doubt in his eyes. "It has, Your Highness. And I've returned to discuss matters of importance." "Matters of importance," Zarath repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You've come here to speak of peace, I assume? I wonder, after all these years, what makes you think that I would want anything to do with your kind?" Jackson didn't flinch. He stood tall, his posture firm. "I didn't come here for your approval, Prince Zarath. I came because it's time for our people to move forward." Zarath narrowed his eyes. "Move forward? Do you think I need anything from humans? Your people are still weak, scattered across the galaxy. Your fleets are nothing more than a nuisance." Jackson's expression remained calm. "I see you still believe that," he said softly. "But I'm not here to discuss our fleets or our strength. I'm here because the future of the galaxy depends on cooperation. Our people have fought too many wars, and we've learned that no one can stand alone. We've reached out because we believe there's more to gain from peace than from war." The words were simple, yet they cut deeper than Zarath cared to admit. He had heard about the humans' growth, how they had built alliances of their own, how they had become a force to be reckoned with. But to hear Jackson say it so plainly, it unsettled him. "You speak of peace," Zarath said slowly. "How can we trust a species that once insulted me and walked away from my offer?" The room fell silent, the tension thick as the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Jackson's eyes met Zaroth's once more, and for a moment Zaroth thought he saw something flicker their regret, perhaps, or something more. But whatever it was gone before the prince could truly understand it. Jackson didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the other dignitaries present. Then he spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of years of leadership and experience. "We don't need your trust, Prince Zaroth," Jackson said, his tone measured. "What we need is your cooperation. There's a storm coming, something none of us can face alone. I'm not asking for an alliance out of some need for power or pride. I'm asking because the galaxy needs us all to stand together. In you." He paused. "You may not have forgotten the insult I gave you all those years ago, but I assure you, it was never meant as an insult. It was a decision. I walked away not because I feared you, but because I knew that one day I would have to come back, and I would be ready." The room was silent again. This time it wasn't just the humans who held their breath. Zaroth could see the shock on the faces of the other delegates, the surprise at the calm strength in Jackson's words. He could feel it, the shift. The human had not come here with the anger Zaroth had expected. He had come with a purpose, and that purpose was one Zaroth couldn't easily dismiss. Zaroth clenched his fists. His pride had been wounded by the human. Captain once, but this time he knew something was different. He had to acknowledge it. He had to admit that humans were no longer the weak, insignificant species he had once thought them to be. "Well," Zaroth said, his voice low and sharp, "it seems we both have grown in the years since that fateful meeting. I'll admit that your words carry weight, but I will not make any promises today." Jackson nodded, not appearing disappointed. "I wouldn't expect you to, but I hope, Prince Zaroth, that you will at least consider the future for both our peoples." With that, the human delegation turned to leave. Zaroth stood still, watching them go. His mind raced, not with anger, but with something deeper, a realization that the future of the galaxy might indeed depend on cooperation. Perhaps, just perhaps, Jackson Clark was right. The tension in the Grand Hall lingered long after Jackson Clark and his delegation left. Prince Zaroth remained standing, his eyes locked on the door through which the humans had exited. The diplomats and officials in the room exchanged uncomfortable glances, but none dared to speak. The silence was thick, as though the very air had changed. Zaroth's mind raced. He had never been one to easily admit when he was wrong, but something about Jackson's words had cut through his pride. The human had spoken with the calmness of someone who had seen the galaxy for what it truly was, a place where survival depended on alliances, not dominance. "Your Highness Talan," the advisor, finally spoke, breaking the silence. His voice was cautious, as though testing the prince's mood. "Do you think we should consider their offer? The humans have grown stronger in the past few decades. Their fleets, their technology, it's unlike anything we've seen." Zaroth turned to face Talan, his sharp eyes narrowing. "I should accept an alliance with them." His voice was heavy with disbelief, as though the very idea disgusted him. Talan hesitated. "It's not about what we think, Your Highness. It's about what the future holds. The galaxy is changing, and perhaps it's time we change with it." The prince's lips tightened into a thin line. "The humans are an unpredictable species. They will betray us when it suits them." Talan's gaze didn't waver. "Or they will stand with us. We won't know until we try." Zaroth stared at his advisor for a long moment before turning away, his gaze once again drifting to the empty doorway. His thoughts were torn. Part of him still wanted to dismiss Jackson and his human fleet as nothing more than a fleeting threat. Another part, the part he rarely acknowledged, wondered if this was the beginning of something greater. "I will not make a decision yet," Zaroth finally said, his voice cold. "We will watch. We will wait." 2 days later, the human delegation returned as promised. This time, however, things felt different. There was a subtle tension in the air, a nervous energy that hadn't been there before. Zaroth could feel it, as though the entire galaxy was holding its breath, waiting for the outcome of this strange meeting, Jackson Clark entered the hall once more, but this time his expression was different. Gone was the calm confidence from their first meeting. His face was hard, his eyes focused. There was an urgency in his movements, a sense of purpose that Zeroth hadn't expected. He wasn't here to negotiate anymore. Zeroth rose from his throne, his gaze piercing through the human captain. "Captain Clark," he said, his voice firm. "It seems you've come back to speak again. What has changed in the last 2 days?" Jackson didn't respond right away. Instead, he motioned for his crew to step forward. One of the humans, a young officer with dark hair and a stern expression, stepped forward, holding a small device in his hand. "This," Jackson said, his voice now steely, "is why we've returned." He nodded to the officer, who activated the device. The holographic display that flickered to life was unlike anything Zeroth had seen before. It was a map of the galaxy, but there was something wrong. Certain regions were glowing red, signaling danger. There were warnings flashing across the map, messages in languages Zeroth didn't recognize. "What is this?" Zeroth asked. His curiosity piqued despite himself. Jackson's eyes met the prince's, and for the first time, Zareth saw a hint of fear in the human's gaze. "This is a warning," Jackson said quietly. "A threat from the unknown." Zaroth took a step forward. Leaning closer to the map, "Explain yourself," he demanded. Jackson looked at his officer, who began to speak. "These regions," the officer said, "are marked by a strange hostile force. We've tracked them across several systems, and they're getting closer too. Our colonies, we've tried to make contact, but they don't respond to any of our messages. All we know is that they destroy everything in their path." The map zoomed in on one of the red zones, a barren planet surrounded by debris. The officer spoke again. "This was a human colony, a peaceful one. We lost contact with them a week ago. By the time we arrived, there was nothing left. Destruction." The prince's face remained impassive, but inside his thoughts were spinning. He had always prided himself on knowing the galaxy's threats, knowing the dangers that lurked in the shadows. But this was different. "Never encountered anything like this before? Are you suggesting," Zaroth began, "that we should align ourselves with humans to face this threat?" Jackson nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Yes, it's not just a human problem anymore. If we don't act together, this force will destroy everything alien and human alike." Zaroth felt a sharp pang in his chest. This was the first time anyone had spoken so plainly about the danger of the future. For the first time in years, Zaroth's pride was no longer his strongest emotion. Real fear began to settle in his bones. "If your human fleet is so powerful," Zaroth said, "why do you need us?" Jackson met his gaze, his voice steady. "Because alone, none of us will survive. And you know that, Prince Zarathus. You know that we are stronger together." Zaroth hesitated. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, fear, pride. How could a human, a species he had once so easily dismissed, be the one to offer him such a hard truth? "We can offer you our technology," Jackson continued, "and our fleet. But we need your help to stop them before it's too late." Zaroth's mind raced. He looked at the map again, at the red zones growing closer to the human colonies. Thought of his empire, his people, and the vast power he had spent his life building. Could he truly risk it all to help these humans, the very species he had once mocked? "I will not make a decision immediately," Zaroth said, his voice tight. "But I will. Consider your offer." Jackson nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. "That's all we ask." As the human delegation turned to leave, Zaroth stayed in his place, watching them go. His mind was still clouded, the weight of the decision ahead pressing down on him. But there was something more, something he couldn't deny. The human captain had not only returned, but he had come with the truth. The truth that Zaroth could no longer ignore. The galaxy was changing, and Zaroth had to decide where he stood in this new world. The next few days were filled with tension. Prince Zaroth had never felt so conflicted. On one hand, his pride urged him to refuse Jackson Clark and the human offer. His empire had always thrived on its independence, its superiority over the lesser species. But on the other hand, the threat of the unknown force, the force that had destroyed human colonies, was something Zareth could not ignore. As the days passed, Zareth found himself unable to shake the feeling that something was shifting in the galaxy. The humans, once so weak and scattered, had now become a force to be reckoned with, and their technology, as Jackson had shown him, was impressive. It made Zareth wonder just how strong the human fleet had become. Was it really as powerful as they claimed? Tlan, the prince's trusted advisor, noticed the change in his leader's mood. Zaroth had always been a man of pride, but now he seemed to be questioning everything. Tlan knew that the prince was torn between the past and the future, between the arrogance of his old ways and the reality of the new galactic order, Your Highness. Tlan said one evening, his voice soft but filled with concern. We cannot ignore the facts. The humans have offered their help, and the threat is real. If we don't act now, we may lose everything. Zareth's sharp eyes fixed on Tlan. And you think we should simply align ourselves with them? After everything that has happened between us and them? Tlan bowed his head. I do not suggest we trust them blindly. But the enemy is beyond us all. If we don't act together, we risk everything. Zareth's fingers tapped against the armrest of his throne. The walls of the palace seemed to close in around him as the weight of the decision grew heavier. Had spent his entire life building his empire, forging alliances with countless species, all while seeing humanity as little more than a nuisance. But now, their fleets were a real threat, and their technology was something he could no longer overlook. The prince stood abruptly, pacing across the room. I have always prided myself on my strength, on my ability to face threats alone, he muttered. I never thought I would need to rely on anyone else. Tlan watched him carefully but said nothing. Zareth's internal struggle was evident. He was a leader who had been taught to never show weakness, never admit fear. But in the face of this unknown threat, fear was creeping in. No matter how hard Zareth tried to push it away, I will meet with them again, Zareth said suddenly, stopping in his tracks. I will decide this myself. Tlan bowed deeply. As you wish, Your Highness. The next day, the human delegation arrived once again. But this time, the atmosphere was different. There was a sense of urgency in the air, as though time was running out. Jackson Clark entered the room with a grim expression, his eyes betraying the weight of the situation. His crew was not with him this time, only his trusted officer, a woman named Lieutenant Zara. Jackson wasted no time. We don't have much time, he said, his voice steady but filled with an edge of worry. The unknown force is advancing faster than we expected. Our scouts have tracked them to the outer rim. They're not just destroying colonies, they're erasing entire systems. Studied Jackson closely. The human captain's words were dire, and the intensity in his eyes was not something Zareth had expected. It was as if the human had become a different person since their first meeting. There was no arrogance in his voice now, only the harsh. The reality of a leader who had seen too much destruction. You say they are erasing entire systems. Zareth said slowly, his voice tinged with skepticism. But we still don't know who or what they are. How can we fight an enemy we don't even understand? Jackson's jaw tightened, but he met Zareth's gaze head-on. That's why we need to act now. Waiting will only give them more time. To advance? We've seen their tactics. They overwhelm and destroy, leaving nothing behind. If we don't unite our forces, we will all be wiped out, one by one. Zareth's heart pounded in his chest. The cold, calculated demeanor he had always prided himself on was faltering in the face of Jackson's words. For the first time in years, Zareth was confronted with something he could not control, something he could not predict. Lieutenant Zara stepped forward, activating a holographic display. The image that appeared made Zareth's stomach twist. It was a video feed of a destroyed planet, a once thriving world reduced to ashes. The alien structures, the cities, were now nothing more than rubble, and in the distance, Zareth could see the faint glow of what appeared to be some kind of weapon. We've only encountered a small fraction of their power, Jackson explained. And if we don't join forces now, we won't have time to stop them. Zareth felt a cold shiver run down his spine as he watched the footage. This was no ordinary threat. This was something far beyond anything he had encountered. The video ended, leaving the room in complete silence. Jackson spoke again, his voice low but determined. "Prince Zeroth, I know you don't want to trust us. I know you've been taught that humans are not worth your time. But the truth is, we're all in this together. If you don't stand with us, you'll be standing alone." Zeroth stood frozen, his thoughts in turmoil. The pride that had always guided his actions now seemed insignificant in the face of this new threat. He had always believed that he could face any challenge alone, but the situation had changed. The galaxy was no longer the place it had once been. Things were shifting, and Zeroth could no longer deny it. He took a deep breath and finally spoke. His voice steady but laced with a touch of vulnerability he had not shown in years. "What do you propose we do?" Jackson's expression softened. "We unite. We bring together our fleets, our technology, and our resources. We fight as one." Heart beat heavily in his chest as he weighed the options. He had always been a leader who relied on his strength and his empire's might. But in this moment he realized that his strength alone would not be enough to protect his people. He needed help. And for the first time, he saw that the humans had something valuable to offer, something more than just technology or soldiers. They had the same desperation to survive, the same will to protect their people. "I will agree to an alliance," Zeroth said quietly, his voice firm, yet filled with a new sense of understanding. "But it will not be easy. We'll have to trust each other, Captain Clark. And that is something neither of us has done in the past." Jackson nodded, his eyes filled with relief. "I understand, Your Highness, but this is the only way forward." Zeroth turned away, his mind still reeling. He had made a choice, but it felt like the beginning of something much larger. He had stepped into a new reality, one where his pride and his empire were no longer enough. The future was uncertain. But for the first time in years, Zeroth felt a small spark of hope. This alliance with humans might just be the key to survival land, perhaps, to a new kind of strength. The alliance between Prince Zeroth and Captain Jackson Clark had been forged, but the road ahead was far from easy. Zeroth had never been one to easily trust others, especially not humans. But the threat of the unknown force, the one that had destroyed entire colonies, was real. The time for pride and isolation had passed. Now survival was the only thing that mattered. The next few days were a blur of activity. The human fleet, alongside Zeroth's powerful forces, began to work together. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of tension, moments where old habits died hard. But there was something new in the air, something that Zeroth had never expected. Cooperation. Zeroth had always relied on his own strength. He had built his empire by outwitting his enemies, by conquering and ruling with an iron fist. But now, standing side by side with the humans, he was beginning to see the value of collaboration. They didn't have the raw power of his empire, but they had something else, something that Zeroth could not deny. A fierce determination, a willingness to fight for each other, no matter the odds. Captain Clark was at the center of it all, leading his people with quiet confidence. He wasn't a warrior like Zeroth, but he understood strategy, and he understood what was at stake. Zeroth had to admit that, in his own way. Jackson Clark was just as capable a leader as he was. One evening, after hours of strategy meetings and tense discussions, Zeroth and Jackson stood alone on the balcony of Zeroth's palace, overlooking the vast city below. The air was cool, and the sky was clear. A rare moment of calm amidst the chaos. "You've changed, Captain," Zeroth said quietly, his gaze fixed on the city lights. "I never thought I'd see the day when I'd be working with humans." "Here we are." Jackson didn't look at him. He stared out into the distance, his arms crossed. "I didn't want to work with you either," he said with a small, almost wistful smile. "But when the stakes are this high, you do what you have to do." Zeroth turned to face Jackson, his brow furrowing. "You're saying you didn't come to me because you think we have a chance? You think this alliance will work?" Jackson's eyes met Zeroth's, and for a moment, the weight of their shared history hung between them. "I came because I had no choice," he said simply. "We all had no choice. If we don't stand together, we're all finished." Zeroth felt something stir inside him. The harsh reality of what they were facing was now clearer than it had ever been before. The unknown force was relentless, and if they didn't act fast, it would sweep through every corner of the galaxy. The empire that Zaroth had fought so hard to build could be gone in an instant. "I don't know what will happen when this is over," Zaroth said, his voice softer than usual. "But I've made my decision. We fight together." Jackson nodded, a small look of approval in his eyes. "That's all we need. Trust and unity. That's how we win." The next day, the human and alien fleets combined their forces, preparing for the greatest battle they had ever faced. The enemy was approaching, and their forces were unlike anything either of them had ever encountered. The humans advanced. Technology combined with Zaroth's military strength would be their only hope. The battle began at the edge of the galaxy. In the deep reaches of space where the stars seemed to dim under the weight of the conflict, Zaroth commanded his forces from his flagship, a massive vessel that loomed in space like a dark titan. Jackson, aboard his own command ship, worked closely with Zaroth's officers to coordinate the combined fleet. At first, everything went according to plan. The human and alien fleets moved in perfect harmony, striking at the heart of the enemy's formation. Zaroth was impressed by how well the humans had integrated into his strategies. Their ships, fast and nimble, darted in and out of the battle, drawing the enemy's fire away from the heavier, more powerful vessels in Zaroth's fleet. But the enemy had more tricks up their sleeves than anyone had anticipated. As the battle wore on, it became clear that the unknown force was far more organized than they had first thought. They adapted quickly to the human and alien tactics, using strange weapons that seemed to disrupt the very fabric of space around them. "Something's wrong," Jackson said, his voice tense as he watched the tactical display. "They're getting smarter." Zaroth's eyes narrowed as he studied the screen. He had faced many enemies in his time, but this was different. The unknown force wasn't just a threat, they were an intelligence, a cold, calculating force that could learn and adapt in real time. "They're evolving," Zaroth said, his voice low. "We've underestimated them." The enemy's forces grew stronger, their attacks more coordinated. It wasn't long before the first of Zaroth's ships were destroyed. The sounds of alarms filled the bridge, and the battle grew increasingly chaotic. "Retreat," Zaroth ordered, his voice rising with the urgency of the situation. "Fall back. We can't win this fight head-on." But it was too late. The enemy had already cut off their escape routes. The battle had turned into a desperate fight for survival. Ships were being destroyed left and right. Zaroth's flagship was taking heavy fire. "We need to think fast or we're all dead." Jackson shouted across the comms, "We have to change our approach." Zaroth's mind raced. This wasn't a battle he could fight with force alone. The enemy was too smart, too quick. They couldn't overpower them in this form, but maybe they didn't need to. "Jackson," Zaroth said, his voice sharp, "prepare to deploy the new weapon. We need to create a distraction." Jackson's eyes widened in understanding. "Are you?" "Sure, we don't have a choice," Zaroth replied, his voice grim. "Do it." The human fleet shifted, moving into position. Zaroth's fleet followed suit, coordinating with the humans to create a massive opening in the enemy's defenses. The new weapon, something Zaroth had been keeping secret until now, was unleashed. It wasn't a weapon of destruction, it was a weapon of confusion. The shockwave it released disrupted the enemy's systems, scrambling their communications, and sending their ships into disarray. For the first time in the battle, the enemy faltered. Their forces were disorganized, and the combined fleets of humans and aliens struck back with everything they had. It wasn't an easy victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. When the battle was over, the enemy was retreating, leaving the humans and aliens to pick up the pieces. The combined fleets had held their ground, but it had come at a great cost. Ships were lost, lives were lost, and the galaxy was forever changed. Zaroth stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring out into the blackness of space. The silence was deafening. He had fought battles before, but this one had been different. This time, he had fought alongside the humans, and for the first time in years. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Respect. Jackson walked up beside him, his face tired but resolute. "We did it. Together." Zarath nodded, his gaze still fixed on the stars. "Yes, we did, and we will do it again if we must." There was no grand speech, no elaborate gestures. The two leaders stood side by side, understanding that this was just the beginning. The threat may have been pushed back for now, but the battle for the future of the galaxy was far from over. And in that silence, amidst the wreckage of war, Zarath realized that for the first time, he had found something far more powerful than pride. He had found something that could truly change the galaxy: unity.